Hey friends, my name is Jake. Welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge on a cold, wet day. It's supposed to have a high of 10 today. That's about 50 Fahrenheit. And it's wet and rainy. But we haven't had rain for almost a month now, so that's a good thing. Today, I'm looking at something that I don't usually look at. Well, I'm doing more and more fixed blade reviews. But I don't do an awful lot of cold steel reviews, although I just ordered another cold steel, the AD15 Light. I tend to get a lot of flack. I get people getting mad at me for the things that I say about cold steel knives. You know, I use the exact same standard for every knife. Like, I want knives to be good, and not just, hey, that's an American brand, therefore it must be good. I just don't buy into that. I certainly don't buy into that for Canadian brands. There's, a Canadian knife brand that's fairly popular, and I just don't like it at all. It's just the way it is. Literally, it's because of the way it is. I try really hard to stay objective, although no human is perfectly objective. There's my little intro to this thing. I'm going to tell you what I think of this. This is the Bushman SK5 steel on this. There's a Bowie version of this knife, and they've also got a Bushman folder. It's a single piece of steel, the entire thing, one piece of steel. And, it's got a hollowed handle right there. And if you're curious about it, I'm also going to talk about the sheath too. And if you're curious about this knife, stick around and you're going to find out what Jake's opinion is of the Bushman. Keep watching. Fixed blade reviews used to be pretty uncommon at Canadian Cutting Edge. It'd be like maybe 1 in 15 knives would be a fixed blade knife. But in the last year and a half or so, Canada Border Services Agency is making it harder and harder and harder to import folding knives, locking folding knives into Canada. So I'm reviewing more fixed blade knives. Now, I am not an outdoorsman expert. Now, I've got outdoor skills, but because of my, chronic illnesses, I've had 13 surgeries on my right knee since I was 12 years old. I'm just not a super outdoors guy, so I'm not giving you a Bushman review. I'm reviewing the Bushman, if you understand my point right there. SK5 carbon steel. Now, SK5 carbon steel is kind of an odd thing. So many people are going, that's such an awesome steel. It can have a Rockwell up to 65. Now, if you just look it up on Google, 65, that's a hard steel. Like that thing's got to be able to hold an edge super, super well. But if you take the time to go to coldsteel.com and look up the Bushman, you realize that they claim to harden this knife to 54 on the Rockwell C scale. So the edge is not super extremely durable. It does dull fairly quickly, but bringing it down to 54 makes this blade very, very tough. By that, I mean, it's not going to bend all that easily. It's not going to snap when you try to bend it. It's just going to, take a little bit of a curve if you bend it too far. The tip, it's not just going to snap off all that easily. It's going to bend on you. You might be able to bend it back. Of course, you can break tips on knives. There are some people that have broken their Bushman knives doing some levering action. It tends to be that you get weak points right here. I think it's just metal fatigue from when they pressed it. If the steel was not properly softened or annealed, whatever word you want to use, before they formed this, there can be a lot of stress right in there, and that can help cause it to break. Or right here along, that line where the heel of the blade starts, so they got that transition to the plunge. That's just a little bit weaker there than it is, just behind or just ahead of it. Any slight weak spot becomes the spot where things break. A one-piece knife like this doesn't give you a license to abuse it. Maybe the price point does, and certainly it's your own knife. You can do with it whatever you want. I'm just saying it's not, 100% unbreakable. It's just less likely to break than some knives. It's a one piece of steel. It's one flat piece of steel that they've curled up the edges right here, and, just to make it round. Now, it's an expanding circle, so it's smaller here and it gets wider, roughly an inch at the outer end right here. They put a hole here, so you could turn this thing into a spear. In fact, a lot of people do. I was going to do that this summertime, but this summer just got away from me, so I'm not going to demonstrate this thing as a spear. But certainly that's a thing that you can do with this. Just make sure that you don't just try to ram a dowel or a rod in here. Shape it. Use the cutting edge of the knife to shape it into a cone shape. Try to get as nice a snug fit in there as possible, because the tighter your fit, even fit is what I'm thinking, the tight, even fit in here is going to make it a much stronger joint. And yeah, do definitely put a screw in there. Notice one thing here. There's the straight edge. This handle's not centered. It's off to this side. It's not right down the middle of the handle. In their left hand, the blade's in line with your thumb a little bit more. On this side, the spine of the blade is not really in line with your thumb. I like the idea that it's in line with my thumb. Just makes it that much more comfortable. Now, the steel is not super thick. I'm going to give you all the dimensions a little bit later on. We've got a powder coat on here, a way of applying paint using static electricity. I didn't scratch this thing all up. I've not done an exceedingly abundant amount of cutting with this. You'll find on reviews of these where people, do torture tests and things, this paint coating will come off pretty easily. So just be aware of that. That's just something to expect. Blade shape, we've got a straight spine. We've got an awful lot of belly. In fact, it's completely all belly. We've got a hollow grind here that doesn't come up very high. The edge here, while we have a hollow grind, it does keep getting thick fairly quickly. No sharpener's choil. Badging is right here. I'm glad that it's not super large. Cold Steel is known for large badging. Just take a look at the sheath. But at least it's not all that large on the blade. And then the Bushman's logo is on that side. Now, before I talk more about the performance of this, we've got this sheath here. As it says right there, Secure X. That means this is a kind of plastic that's got glass fibers in it. Now, one of the best videos that I've seen on does this kind of Secure X sheath make edges go dull is done by Peter over on the Cedric and Ada Gear and Outdoors channel. He did a bunch of testing, and definitely, if you're rubbing the cutting edge along the belly of this knife, it's going to be getting dull. Now, on this knife especially, it's easy to open or put the knife in and out without rubbing on that edge. So you just have to push the spine into the spine of the sheath as you're going in and out. So I don't mind this sheath. We do have a drain hole on the end there. And we've got a ferrocerium rod included and built into that. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail later. Danger, do not grip above this line when handling the knife. Don't be grabbing it up here when you're trying to pull the knife out of it. You might cut yourself, so you stay behind that edge. And it's really easy to get in and out. The belt loop section, you push it back. So I'd take my thumb right here and I push back, and then it comes out easily because it's got these little retention points right there that grab onto the side of the handle right there. So when you put it in there, that's holding on. So I just pull it back and take it out. And so then it's letting go of those points. So that's pretty good. The belt loop, we've got something that's a little bit like what we see on Mora knives. We've got this hole back here. So you can use this, to hang it up. Let's say you've got a shop or a storage area or something. You like to hang up your knives, you can do that if you want to. The belt loop is okay. You can see you've got the loop here, but they included this piece of plastic here that comes out and back up, which means if you're trying to pull this out of your, pull the knife out of your sheath while it's on your belt, you pull up, your belt's going to hang on here and keep the sheath in place. So you don't have to keep one hand on the sheath if you're using the belt loop. So yeah, I don't really have a big problem with this, especially when you're thinking about the price of the knife. We'll go over that in just a second. One more thing about the ferro rod is it's got a plastic holder. There's a hole there, so you've got a lanyard to tie it off. It has the retention just with this bit of plastic here. It's not very well retained. That can wear out and have this come out too easily. And I'd like the rod to be longer. And as you can see, I've not done anything with this ferrocerium rod yet because the only place to strike it on this knife is on the cutting edge. I'm not that fond of that. So later on in the video, I'm going to show you what I did. I'm going to grind off a section of the steel on the blade somewhere, on the spine of the blade, to create a sharp edge that will be able to throw sparks without having to get onto the cutting edge. Now, if I didn't do that, the place where I would throw sparks is right here on the heel of the blade. Because on this kind of knife, you've got this length for a reason. You're probably going to use the beginning section more often than this section, although I wouldn't like to dull this section either. That's all the basics covering it. Now, how well did it actually cut in my tests? It cut okay. It's fairly sharp from the factory, roughly average from the knives that I review, except for it's pretty thick behind the grind, and that slowed it down an awful lot. I don't really like how thick it is. It made the edge more durable. We do have some failure, right there. It turns out that the main bevel that I had measured, I put it in my sharpening system, and I put a black marker on here, and when the stone wipes off, all the way along that silvery section, you can measure the angle to know what it is. Turns out it's got not a micro bevel, it's sort of a bigger than a micro bevel along most of it that is a steeper angle. The angles that I measured aren't that bad, but the very steep angle at the edge, makes it, instead of like this, it turns the edge into, I can't quite do it. There we go. With those fingers, I can sort of do it. You've got the edge here, and then you got the micro bevel, making it even, more blunt. And that's why it didn't cut all that well. Unfortunately, later on in the video, I'll sharpen this knife, and I sharpen it before I take a measurement of those micro bevels. So I don't know what that exact number is, but I'll give you the main angle later on in the video. So they did a poor job sharpening. Also, when I sharpen it, since I've got so much experience with sharpening, I'll be able to tell you what I think the hardness is on this. If it feels what it does, like they say 54, or if it's higher, I would have much preferred, if this is really SK5, that they would have hardened it around 5960. I would think that that's a much better compromise, keeping it really tough and durable, and still making it hard enough to be more useful. 54 is extremely soft, so I'll find out how soft it is. I'm just not happy with its cutting performance. How about the price? It depends on where you want to go shopping. I got mine at White Mountain Knives, and in hindsight, I should not have. I do get knives from White Mountain Knives, and I do promote their store, but I just can't tell you to go to a store where they're selling it for more money. This is $36.99 at White Mountain Knives. Of course, you're going to save 10% off that. It's still in the 30s, and you can get it from Cold Steel directly for $25, $24.99. Amazon.com has got this thing really cheap, $21.10. Let's take a pause now. I'm going to sharpen this and find out how hard this edge is, and I'm going to give it a new angle and test it, and I'll come back and tell you what my findings are. I'm back after sharpening and testing and everything. Oh, you might even still see some tape residue there, because I always, put tape on the knife before I put it in my clamps to sharpen it. I didn't try to get a perfect new bevel all the way across. I just wanted to sharpen the edge, and I decided on 20 degrees per side, but you can see a little bit of the old grind left over there. And on this side, there's a few spots along there here at the heel, and certainly over here at the tip where, there's still some of the old grinds on there. In any case, my non-scientific estimate of how hard this steel is, it feels like it's around 58, 59. Very similar to a lot of the budget knives that I sharpen. 14C 28N kind of stuff, 8CR 13 MOV kind of stuff. It's not 54. That's just too soft. So I'm not sure why they have that number on their website for this. It's not that soft. And that was a good surprise. And now that I sharpened it and gave it a nice consistent edge all the way along, when I tested the sharpness and got that 145 best score, that's great, but I found out later on, I decided to test it again just before I sharpened it. And even though my initial test was at 3 spots, maybe not these exact spots, but 3 spots in the average, I tested it at 10 spots, and it was really touch and go. Some spots, were as bad as 250 BES, and other spots, were more to that average of 140, 150, around that range. So my problem when I was cutting through stuff that I found that it didn't cut all that well was because that edge was very spotty. It was just not a consistent edge. Now I'm getting a score of about 45, 40. And I didn't go too fine. I went down to about 20 micron stone on here. And, it's got a much better edge on it. I wouldn't go lower than 20 degrees per side for a knife like this because it's not really a finesse kind of knife. This is, a knife designed to do hard work. Although it's not super thick on the spine for doing any batoning. I wouldn't baton anything other than maybe some kindling with this. It's not a fro, it's a knife. You use a fro if you want to do batoning, in my opinion. The weight of the knife, 270 grams, that's 9.52 ounces. The sheath, that's including the ferro rod, 78 grams, 2.75 ounces. Total weight for everything you see here, 348 grams, 12.27 ounces. Like I said, the sharpness from the factory was 145 BES. The cutting edge length, 171.9 millimeters, 6.77 inches. The blade length, now where do you measure where the blade ends and the handle begins, right? So roughly where this, curve up starts is what I did. 195 millimeters, 7.68 inches. The thickness of the blade is 2.5 millimeters, 0.0985. The blade depth, that's this measurement, it's biggest right here in the middle of the knife, 39.9 millimeters, 1.57 inches. The thickness behind the grind, and I measured it in 3 spots, 0.7 millimeters, 27.5 thousandths of an inch. Much too thick. It just is much too thick. Now the grind angles, the average. This side's got an average of 18.1 degrees. This side's got an average of 15.8 degrees from the factory. This side started at 19.2 and it ended at 14.1 degrees. That's about 5.1 degrees of change along the length. Yeah, that's a lot. This guy was 19 degrees on this side for most of it, but then near the tip, it went to 15.3 degrees. The handle length, again, approximately 115 millimeters, 4.5 inches. How thick is the handle? Its widest point here is 30 millimeters, which is 1.18 inches. On the inside, it's almost exactly an inch. The handle depth this way is actually a bit more, 31.2, 1.23 inches. It's not round. The grip area, between my thumbs, it's about 11.5 centimeters, about 4.5 inches, and the total length of this knife is about 310 millimeters, 12.2 inches long. Now let me pause it again, and I'm going to see if I can put a nice sharp spine on here. I ground off a short section here. Now you can see a little bit that there's a bit of a line in the middle. I ground it off so there'd be a burr on either side with my grinder. That way I could do it either way. And let's see if it throws any sparks. I'm going to turn the lights off. Clearly, it throws sparks. So it's not a bad ferrocerium that they put in here. And if you do that, you can throw sparks with your knife. If you're going to get it for around that $20 mark that you can get it on Amazon, or even $25 at some other stores, that's US dollars, it's a fair buy if you want a knife like this. If you're okay with, it not being the best for stabbing, maybe you just want to play around, put a piece of wood in here and, have some fun. The blade's not super thick, but I think they did a good job with this. I can't doubt that it's the steel type. I've got no way of testing it. And I found out that the hardness is reasonable for me, in my opinion. Decent quality sheath, usable. It holds the knife safely. You're not going to dull the blade if you don't let it rub on that edge. The ferrocerium holder, it's not great, but it's okay. Belt loop's pretty good. The edge, I wouldn't mind if this edge came, maybe 1/4 of an inch further, maybe even 3/8 of an inch further, closer to the thumb, because I like cutting, close to my hand. It would have had to curve back a little bit more. I think they could have done it. I think they could have done it no problem at all. The grinding from the factory, it's pretty bad, but you should be able to sharpen it at home fairly well if you know anything about sharpening knives. It's a decent buy. Thank you so much to my supporters. You guys are awesome. I appreciate your monthly help a lot. The knife sale, a couple weeks ago, last week, went quite well, so I appreciate that. And here is the Cold Steel Bushman. If you want an even stronger knife, at least from flexing, get the Bowie version because you've got more steel coming up this way and it'll be even less flexible. On hindsight, I think I would have got the Bowie knife instead of this one. But of course, get whatever you want. And thank you so much for watching, for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And remember, friends, cut towards your chum, not your thumb.